Tonight, somewhere, a parent will lower a baby into a crib. The room will be warm, a monitor will glow on the nightstand, the door will close. And for the next few hours, that child will be protected by walls, heating, clean water, medicine, and technology the parent may barely notice. Now remove all of it. No crib, no monitor, no sealed house. No pediatrician, no antibiotics. Just a newborn that cannot walk, feed itself, regulate its own temperature, or escape anything that finds it. Ancient humans lived through cold nights, food shortages, injuries, infections, and predators. Yet every person alive today descends from generations of children who survived that same helpless beginning. So how did ancient humans keep them alive? Did our species solve the problem in a way we've almost stopped noticing? Why did human babies become so difficult to keep alive in the first place? The easiest explanation would be that ancient babies were simply tougher than babies today. If that were true, the mystery would already be solved. A newborn horse stands within hours. A chimpanzee infant grips its mother's fur almost immediately. A human newborn can't hold up its own head. It can't crawl. It can't even keep itself warm without help. That isn't because modern babies have become weaker. In 2012, anthropologist Holly Dunsworth and her colleagues revisited one of the oldest questions in human evolution. Why are human babies born before their brains have finished developing? Human brains continue growing at an extraordinary pace after birth. A newborn's brain is only about 28% of its adult size. Most of the organ that will eventually let you plan, remember, invent, and speak is still under construction while you're already out in the world. As human brains became larger over evolutionary time, babies began entering the world before those brains had finished developing. That left human newborns almost completely dependent on someone else. If the adult carrying it became exhausted, or injured, or simply needed both hands to gather food, the baby had no backup plan. If babies were this helpless, how could one parent possibly keep one alive? Ancient parents were probably just stronger. Life was harder, they walked farther, worked longer, endured more. Perhaps keeping a helpless baby alive was simply another challenge they learned to overcome. That explanation lasts until you stop looking at the first few days after birth and start looking at the many years that followed. In 2002, anthropologist Hilliard Kaplan and his colleagues asked a different question. Why do humans spend so much longer growing up than almost every other mammal? Their answer had very little to do with babies, and almost everything to do with survival. Humans don't live on food that's easy to find. Large animals, honey, underground tubers. The kinds of foods that take years to learn how to hunt, gather, or dig. A young human can't do those things well, not because they're weak, because they haven't learned how yet. Growing up slowly was the solution. Humans stayed dependent for years because surviving as a human takes years to master. For much of their early lives, they consume far more food than they produce. Then Kaplan noticed something else. Humans don't become their most productive until surprisingly late in life, not in their teens, not in their 20s. Many people don't reach peak food production until around their 40s. For decades, older members of the group produce more food than they need themselves. That surplus feeds everyone who can't. Now imagine trying to do all of that alone. One mother's carrying an infant, searching for food, feeding herself, and caring for another young child. Tomorrow, the same work begins again. It wasn't about determination, but math. One person has only so many hours, only so much food, only so much energy. If human infants remained dependent for years, and adults reached their greatest productivity decades later, then one exhausted parent was never carrying only a baby. They were carrying the future of an entire food economy. Perhaps there was never a solution. Perhaps ancient humans simply accepted that many children wouldn't survive. Without hospitals and without antibiotics, without vaccines, ancient children must have been incredibly vulnerable. The best estimates suggest that around half of all children may have died before reaching adulthood. That sounds like a world where children were almost disposable, until archaeologists started opening graves. In 2005, excavations at Krems-Wachtberg in Austria uncovered something extraordinary. Beneath a mammoth shoulder blade lay the graves of two newborn babies. Ancient DNA later showed they were identical twins. One died shortly after birth. The other survived for about 50 days. Then something happened that no one expected. The grave was reopened. The second twin was carefully placed beside the first. Someone returned. Someone remembered exactly where that tiny grave was. Someone chose to bury them together. 31,000 years later, That decision is still visible in the ground. Then there is Arma Verena in northwestern Italy. About 10,000 years ago, a baby girl was buried with dozens of shell beads and pendants. Researchers studying the arrangement of those ornaments suggested they may once have decorated the clothing, or perhaps even the carrier, that had held her during life. These were not hurried burials. If babies meant so little, why spend precious ornaments on one? Why reopen a grave for another? Why mark their passing with such care? Ancient humans invested deeply in children despite knowing how fragile they were. If one parent couldn't carry that burden alone, and children mattered too much simply to abandon, who was helping keep them alive? We can't stand in the middle of a campsite from 30,000 years ago and watch parents raise their children. But some hunting and gathering societies still face many of the same challenges of carrying babies, finding food each day, and raising children without the technology most of us rely on. One of the best studied is the Ife, who live in the Ituri forest of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. During the 1980s, anthropologists Edward Tronick, Gilda Morelli, and Susan Wynn lived alongside Ife families. They were documenting everyday life. Who picked up the baby? Who carried it? Who fed it? Then they started counting. The average infant wasn't cared for by 2 people or 4. It was cared for by 14.2 different people during the observation period. Some infants were cared for by as many as 24 different people. The baby moved from one pair of arms to another, then another. A mother, an older sibling, a grandmother, sometimes someone who wasn't even closely related. The mother simply wasn't expected to be the child's only caregiver. But if so many people were involved, what was everyone actually doing? Different people solved different problems. Some carried, some protected. Some found food. Some fed the baby. Some made it possible for everyone else to keep going. This is something every parent has seen, a crying baby. The moment they're picked up, they begin to settle. In 2013, neuroscientist Gianluca Esposito and his colleagues measured what happened inside babies during those moments. When mothers walked while carrying their infants, the babies didn't simply cry less. Their heart rates slowed. Their movements became calmer. Their bodies changed within seconds. Being carried changed the baby's physiology. Now imagine a camp where someone is always available to pick that child up. Among the Aka hunter-gatherers of Central Africa, anthropologist Barry Hewlett found that fathers often remained within about an arm's length of their infants for roughly half of the observed day. They carried babies, comforted them, played with them. Protection wasn't assigned to one person, it could move. Another clue came from Tanzania. In 1997, anthropologist Kristen Hawkes was studying the Hadza, one of the world's best-known hunting and gathering societies. She expected the strongest food providers to be young adults. Instead, many of the most productive foragers were postmenopausal women. Grandmothers spent hours digging underground tubers that young children couldn't obtain for themselves. Those foods helped feed grandchildren after weaning. The grandmother was helping keep the entire system working. The If, the Aka, the Hadza, all displayed the same solution: shared parental responsibility. We often imagine the greatest inventions in human history as things we can hold: a sharpened spear, a stone axe, a bow, fire. Those inventions helped adults survive, but none of them could feed a newborn. None of them could watch a sleeping infant while someone else searched for food. Human babies could remain unusually dependent because the work of caring for them could be shared. Our ancestors didn't solve helpless infancy by making babies need less. They solved it by making care shareable. That doesn't mean raising babies was easier. It wasn't. Infants still became sick. Parents still lost sons and daughters. Life remained brutally uncertain. But the burden itself could move from one pair of hands to another. Thousands of years later, our homes are safer than anything our ancestors could have imagined. We have hospitals, clean water, baby monitors, yet many parents spend long nights believing they should be able to do everything themselves. Human infants evolved in a world where care could come from many directions. Perhaps the remarkable thing isn't that ancient humans raised babies together. Perhaps it's that we've come to think raising them alone was ever supposed to be normal. Ancient humans didn't keep babies alive because they discovered the perfect way to parent. They kept babies alive because the greatest survival tool humans ever evolved was each other.